What's good, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome to What If Deku Had Beast Boy's Powers Part 2. Now today is going to be a double upload day, so when you're done watching this video, you can go ahead and watch What If Naruto Was the Prowler Part 2. In case you guys haven't checked that series out, trust me, I highly recommend checking it out. However, I'm gonna leave that in. However, ladies and gentlemen, with no further ado, enjoy.
Hey Ross, sauce it up.
As soon as this would be announced, Izuku would immediately turn towards the direction of his teammate, and she would look at him with a big old smile, asking him, "So what's the plan?" And Izuku would look at her and say, "I don't know, but looks like we're gonna be villains." And she'd say, "Hey, cheer up. It's only an act, right?" Izuku would look at her and say, "Yeah, you're right. I mean, I think I'd be great at playing a villain." And Mina goes, "Trust me, we'll be great at playing villains." As from here, both of them would make their way towards the bomb room, and yes, they're going to be villains. And then Bakugo and Ida, shocking, would be the ones who are heroes. Now, Ida, I get it. But Bakugo? Come on. OG Bakugo was definitely not a hero. Yes, he had a powerful quirk, and yes, he could save lives, but his personality, man, it's just night and day. It did not belong anywhere near a hero side profile, right? But no, what would pretty much end up going down is that we would find ourselves in the UA building, and eventually Izuku would be talking to Mina, asking her, okay, what's the game plan? Izuku would say that he probably thinks that they're just going to pretty much go through every single one of the rooms, and eventually, seeing as there's a time limit, they just have to wait them out. He says that they're probably eventually going to get there, so Izuku says that he's going to transform into an animal, stall them, and he would ask her all about her quirk. She then begins to explain how her quirk is acid and how everything about it works. And Izuku, after getting some understanding, would end up being like, okay, look, how about this? Shoot all your acid all over the ground nearby the thing, because I know Ida's quirk is super speed, and maybe that can make him like slip or something. And she's like, good idea. And then she does so, and you know, she basically just drops a bunch of bananas, pretty much is the equivalent of what happens. And ultimately, eventually, after some time would pass and explosions would be heard all over the place, finally a massive explosion would come in and cave in the door, and Bakugo would say, "We're here, now give that bomb over." And seeing as, you know, Bakugo doesn't have the same relationship he had with Deku and Canon, you know, they don't really know each other. They don't have that faded rivalry that they have in the original that we would get, right? So instead of that usual Deku scene happening, we basically just get a more chilled out Bakugo who still does want to win and show that he's the best, right? So Bakugo would go in guns blazing, trying to assert his dominance off rip, and Izuku would immediately transform himself into a rhino, rushing in at the direction of Bakugo, as Bakugo would say, seriously? Jumping out of the way using an explosion before Izuku would transform into an anaconda midway and wrap himself around Bakugo. Bakugo from here would be like, "You let me go," as he shoots explosions, and it would actually damage Izuku pretty heavily, right? He would finally get thrown off of him, and eventually Izuku would say, "All right, you want to play rough? We can play that game." He would bang his chest with his fist, normal, and then immediately he just shifts out of his normal clothes and just begins rushing in at Bakugo. Bakugo, seeing this gigantic gorilla rushing in at him, would get a smirk on his face, as using his explosions, he would shoot a full-powered explosion at Deku's face, and Deku would just tank that shit before socking Bakugo in the face and sending him crashing into a wall. Ida, as this is all happening, would have done exactly what they predicted he would have done and would blitz his way towards the bomb. However, he wasn't expecting to slip and fall, straight hit his head and get knocked out. And so it basically just becomes a 1v2. However, Mina jumps in the way, and as Bakugo's trying to recover from getting slammed into the wall, she would shoot a bunch of acid at Bakugo, which would actually burn him, I'm not gonna lie. And Bakugo would have like second-degree burn marks on his face from the acid. Eventually, after getting angry, Bakugo pulls the pin and aims it at Deku, and Mina would be watching as she's like, "Watch out!" But Deku would pretty much just proceed to turn around and hold his hands up as, you know, Mina just watches as Deku's entire like self would just get blown out of the building. Like, bro literally proceeds to get like blown through the wall and onto the floor. He completely gets absolutely knocked out. And Mina would look at Bakugo and look out the window and be like, you took it too far. What were you thinking? And then Bakugo's like, huh, weaklings. He couldn't take it because he didn't transform into a tougher animal. Maybe if he did that, he'd be fine. And from there, we would hear All Might be like, Bakugo, you need to stop now, report to the office. And Bakugo would immediately do so, grumbling and just being like, whatever. Just like, actually, like this time around, he actually kind of feels bad for what he did. Like, he didn't mean to take it that far, but what happened. And Bakugo's like not really an apologetic guy, so he's not going to go over towards Izuku and be like, sorry about that, you know what I mean? So yeah, instead Bakugo just goes to the office and would be told that what he did was terrible, and if he does it again, he's 100% getting expelled. From here, what would end up going down is that Izuku would end up getting treated by Recovery Girl, and the following day, when Deku would watch the footage of how everything went down, Nezu would tell Izuku that this is a good thing. And Izuku would be like, how's this a good thing? The dude practically almost killed me yesterday. And Nezu would say, exactly. Now, was that allowed? No. And is he going to get punished for that? Yes. However, Izuku, you're missing the big picture. Instead of treating this as a failed exercise, we should treat it as a positive one. See, Katsuki Bakugo, while he may have injured you pretty heavily, he has taught you a very valuable lesson about villains. You shouldn't about villains. See, even though you were the villain in this case, he acted more like a villain than you ever were in this portion. So if we go under the assumption that you were a hero trying to protect people, think about how far villains are willing to go. He's a hero, and even with that knowledge, he was able to use an attack that powerful just trying to actually hurt you. Villains in the real world, they're not going to be thinking to themselves, oh, I should hold back. They're 100% going to be trying to go for the kill every time. And what Bakugo has taught you this time is not to let your guard down and to finish the job quickly. Am I right, Izuku? Izuku looks at the direction of Nezu and would be like, I guess you got a point. I mean, even though he did it in a horrible way, I guess he sort of did teach me a lesson. And Nezu would just look at him and say, perfect. Well, it looks like you've learned your lesson for the day today. Report back to UA in about 2 days when you're finally done with your injuries. And Deku would be like, sure. As from here, he would miss the next 2 days worth of school. And honestly, that other day was just gratuity because Deku was fine. However, he wanted to take it off and just relax and play video games and stuff. I mean, bro, a new game just came out and Deku was trying to get on all night with the boys. You know, of course, gotta respect the hustle. But once Izuku would finally return, everybody would have these permission slips passed out to them by Aizawa, and following that, everybody would pretty much just be told about what's going to be happening after this, right? And pretty much all that happens is that they're told about how, oh, you know, you guys have to get these permission slips signed, the USJ, yada, yada, yada. In the midst of all this, for the following 3 days, one very little incident would happen that I might have to cover, right? And that's pretty much just the incident where Ida's picked this class president. The moment where he stands up and he's like, calm down, we're UA yeah, that happens. But skipping all of that, we're gonna go straight into the USJ, considering that that's really the only important plus cool part of this whole thing. So pretty much what ends up going down following this is that Izuku and the rest of everybody else would all be in the bus, right? They're all chilling, they're talking amongst themselves, and Tsuyu would be talking about who the strongest is. Eventually, she would say that it either has to be Bakugo or Todoroki. She'd say that Izuku's probably up on that list as well had Bakugo not played dirty. However, she says that villains are going to play dirty all the time, so maybe Izuku shouldn't be on the top of that list. And when Izuku hears that, he kind of just grits his teeth and would look at Bakugo with this look of, bro, I'm gonna get you back. And Bakugo would give him a smirk and he would just look away before finally they end up arriving, and eventually 13 would end up greeting them and just telling them all about how dangerous their quirks are and how they need to use them properly and yada yada yada. Eventually, once they would finish all of this, they would eventually make their way inside of the USJ, and inside of there would be when finally the villains would decide to strike. Kurogiri would finally make his presence known, and he would eventually start everything off by saying, sorry for interrupting, heroes, but it looks like we weren't invited. before portals everywhere would begin opening and people would begin realizing that there is a bunch of villains in there. Immediately after this, Izuku would transform into an animal. However, he immediately gets tossed into the ocean, or so he would think. Before opening his eyes, he sees a bunch of villains around him, but immediately Izuku would turn himself into a gigantic octopus-like kraken creature, and he would immediately grab onto the villains as he just begins shaking them underwater violently. He then turns into a shark and would rush in at them as he begins to pretty much chomp on them, and not like eat them, but like he like half chews them, like he leaves them pretty gnarly like shark bites, right? And then he turned into like a giant jellyfish and he would begin shocking these villains. Like he pretty much begins to single-handedly straight destroy these villains underwater. Like, yeah, they have underwater quirks, but they were not expecting anybody like him to be there. Tsuyu, who would finally have ended up saving Mineta and would watch Izuku just transform from different animal to animal, would be completely shocked. Eventually, Izuku would transform into a gigantic whale and he would say, "Hop on," and then they would do so. Once hopping on, Deku would swim all the way back to shore, where Izuku would notice that Aizawa was having a bit of a hard time, and Izuku would immediately transform into a hawk before he immediately begins flying towards his direction. Picking up one of the villains, he flies them as high as they could go, and then he would drop them on top of another villain who was about to actually use an electricity quirk on Aizawa. Aizawa, being saved by Izuku, would look up into the sky as he realizes that Izuku was falling down at a very rapid pace. He had transformed into a rhino, and Izuku would fall on another villain before then using his horn to pretty much just bash a bunch of different villains away, and eventually Izuku would transform into a tiger before he then lunges at another one and claws at them, knocking them out completely, and Aizawa and Deku would both get back to back as Deku would turn back into his human-like state, and Aizawa would say, "What are you doing here, kid? You're not supposed to be here." And Izuku would say, "I'm just doing what I have to do, Aizawa. Not like anybody else is gonna do my job for me, right?" And then Izuku just looks towards Aizawa, smirks, and Aizawa says, "Duck," as a villain would have actually shot a quirk at them, and then Aizawa, using his scarf, would like deflect it midair, and then eventually he would shoot his scarf at the villain before knocking him out clean, slamming his knee into the villain's head, before then suddenly Shigaraki from the sidelines would begin scratching his neck violently. Bro's fiending. And then ultimately what would end up going down is he'd be like, "Kirigiri, Nomu, now," as the Nomu would finally end up getting summoned in the way. And after all of this would finally go down, Shigaraki would say, "Nomu, kill that brat," as the Nomu would immediately rush in at the direction of Izuku, and Izuku would have to turn himself into a hummingbird to try to avoid all the punches that the Nomu would be throwing at him. The Nomu would throw a punch, and Deku would fly out of the way, just barely missing it, and then the Nomu throws punch after punch after punch. And Izuku, like, he's barely dodging this, might I add, only because of his small size and the fact that hummingbirds are very, very fast creatures. So eventually Izuku would turn himself into a snake and wrap himself around the Nomu. However, the Nomu quite literally tosses him off like he's a ragdoll, and like literally there was nothing there. And Izuku would then get thrown far, far away before he then looks at the direction of the Nomu and sees that the Nomu would have rushed in at Aizawa and punched him down, right? Literally shattering his arm, as Izuku would transform into a T-Rex, roar, like, you know what I mean? And then immediately just rush in at the direction of the Nomu and like bite, like he literally just chomps him, right? But the Nomu's legs and like arms would fall off, and then the Nomu in Izuku's mouth would begin regenerating before he then rips Izuku's mouth open and straight punches Izuku in the, like, the Nomu punched a dinosaur in the face, bro. Like, think about that. And Izuku would get sent flying back before then suddenly a voice would be heard in the background. "Ha ha ha ha! Don't fear, because I am here." All Might finally making his presence known, he would immediately jump into the battlefield, and immediately the battle between All Might and the Nomu goes down just like it would in the original. I'm pretty sure that a lot of you guys were like, "Oh, Izuku's probably gonna stomp the Nomu, yada yada yada." But honestly, no, I don't think he will. I mean, Izuku has the capabilities of turning into animals. That's OP, you know, that's cool and all, but when you really think about how powerful the Nomu is in the My Hero Academia universe and how All Might has the power to change the weather with a punch, I mean, like, Beast Boy has been shown to be taken out by people like Robin. Beast Boy has been shown to be taken out by a lot of characters. And I'm not referencing comic Beast Boy because of course the comics always make the characters more OP. But I'm doing the Beast Boy from the original Teen Titans, right? Like the TEENTITANS Teen Titans. Let's go. You know what I mean? Like the original one, the one where he falls in love with Terra and all that stuff. So that's the one that I'm covering. And that's why this Beast Boy might not be as strong as you guys are like, oh, he's a lot stronger than that. But no, yeah, that's pretty much the only reason why things are like that. But continuing on with the story and without wasting any more of you guys' time, what pretty much ends up going down after that is they have a little cleanup situation where they all pretty much end up being taken home and they're all told that they're not going to be going to school for about a week. Eventually that week happens. UA Press would end up pretty much telling everybody what happened. The situation would dive down a little bit and they would finally all find themselves in UA, right? They're all inside and it would be on this day that they're told about the festival. Just like in the original, Uraraka begins to go absolutely nuts at the thought of, being able to prove herself, get internships, and show her parents that, they made the right choice in putting like the little money that they had and working as hard as they are to pretty much give Uraraka the chance to even become a hero, you know what I mean? And that's why she's excited. But Izuku kind of just wants to be a hero because Nezu told him to. I mean, Izuku hasn't talked to his real mother because he feels bad about the fact that he did kind of, put his dad on a t-shirt. Was it intentional? No, but it still happened, right? And what pretty much ends up going down is that Izuku would finally realize oh wow, the whole world is gonna watch me. Like, what if my mom is watching this? You know what I mean? Like he's not sure if she's still alive or not, but he's like, what if she is? You know what I mean? And so he asks Nezu this and he talks to Nezu and he's like, Nezu, I don't know how I feel about participating in the sports festival. And Nezu would be like, what are you talking about, child? You have to participate in the sports festival. It's part of UA's course. And Izuku would say that he knows that, but he just doesn't know how he would feel knowing that his mom might be watching. I mean, he was responsible for his own father's death and he hasn't seen her since the day that she visited the first time that Izuku was incarcerated. And that she only visited him once and the expression on her face was just so sad. Izuku looks at Nezu and would say that he doesn't know how he'd be able to cope with that. And Nezu says not to worry, that his mom is alive and that she, even if she does watch him, what's she gonna do? It's not like she has care over Izuku. Nezu would say that she actually was the one who gave full custody to him over towards Nezu, that she wanted nothing to do with Izuku. And Nezu would say, why not, instead of thinking of this as a way for her to think and judge you, instead think of this as a way to show her what her loss looks like. Show her that if she had just understood you and taken care of you and led you the right way, then maybe you could have been a hero and she could have been in your corner. But this time you get the chance to show her what it's like to not be in your corner. Make her regret that decision, Izuku. Think about it that way. And Izuku, after listening to that, would be like, you know what, Nezu? You're right. I didn't think about it that way, but now that you say it, honestly, I'm kind of pumped. As from here, eventually the day would come and Izuku would make his way towards the podium, having been the one to have gotten the most robot points in the entrance exam. And when he would walk up, he would take a couple deep breaths before being shy at first and tapping the mic and then taking just one more deep breath. And then bro goes full extrovert and all, be like, are you ready? And then the crowd would be like it's silent at first, but Izuku would be like, come on, what is this? It sounds to me like you guys are at he would say a random person name's concert, and then they would laugh and then they'd be like, yeah, you know what I mean? They finally get excited. And then eventually Izuku just gives a really heartfelt excitement moment. He makes everybody feel good about themselves. He tells everybody to try their best. And he pretty much ends the speech by saying plus ultra, right? Eventually though, after that happens, Midnight would take the microphone and say that he got them pretty riled up. So without any further ado, the race. As from here, they would all make their way towards the starting positions, and eventually Midnight would shoot the starting pistol, letting them all immediately start, and Izuku would immediately transform into a hawk, flying towards the direction of the finish line, making as many cuts and corners as he can, and pretty much just flying his way towards the direction of the finish line. Bakugo, who also was using his flight via his explosions, would be making his way there, and Todoroki using his ice and freezing the robots would be neck and neck, and all three of them would be racing for first place. They're all trying their absolute hardest, and after passing the 0-pointer portion, there would really be nothing stopping them other than their stamina, so it's pretty much just a test of stamina. However, Izuku, because of the fact that he's straight up an actual bird, like the creature that he transformed into is literally made to fly, I'm going to be giving the slight edge to Izuku and saying that because of that reason, Izuku does end up winning. Not by a lot, but he definitely does end up winning by a significant amount, right? Like a decent amount, like a good chunk. And after that happens, Izuku would be given the 10 million point headband, right? And he'd immediately be like, yeah, before suddenly he realizes what that means. And everybody, just like in that moment when Izuku realized that everybody turned against him, he would have that same realization of, oh wow, like no way did I just do this to myself. But he looks around and he just sees that everybody's looking at him, and they're all looking at him with this expression of like, you're going down, you know what I mean? Izuku at first would get nervous, but then he would think about how hard his last couple years were and how he's had to deal with that stare for so many years in Tartarus that it doesn't even faze him anymore. Izuku would simply say, come on then, I'll take you all on. As they would all look at him, then like surprisingly some of them would look away, and then Izuku would chuckle before then suddenly somebody comes up to him and would be like, hey, can I join your team? And Izuku would turn, see Mina, and he'd be like, sure, you're welcome to join my team. As from here, two more individuals would walk up and say, let us join.